to College Football Playoff Top 25, presented by Chick-fil-A.
There is clear separation at the top. 3 teams have stake to claim. Number 1, Ohio State, has a rough closing stretch ahead. And after turning back the tide, LSU might be number 1 in just a few moments. And the Bayou Bengals appear to have clear sailing at least until championship week. Clemson also appears to be in the express lane to the playoff. So if 3 spots are already on near lockdown, what a fight it is going to be for that final chair at the playoff table. Maybe up to 8 teams in contention, all of them flawed by performance, record, or resume. But among that group, there are 2 who still have a 0 in the lost column. Old Goldie's never going to give up that ore, but it appears the Gophers have attached a rocket-powered outboard engine to their boat and have rowed their way to validation. Baylor can do the same thing this weekend. The stakes keep getting higher. We're about to find out who's in. For now.
Every one of us, in our own ways, through our own trials, is making our way through a season. And in its great wins and hard moments and sudden losses, there's an answer we all seek to know and all want to find. Touchdown, Tigers! What's our place? How do we measure? Where do we stand? Much goes into that accounting. And now starts the reckoning. The strength of a schedule, the power of a conference, the quality of a victory, the proof of our results. We work, we wait to earn and learn the answer in our own seasons.
And it is intercepted!
Where do we rank? Are we in?
We will find out who's sitting atop and who came out of that meeting in Grapevine, Texas. This is the selection committee war room where the selection committee gathers every week, poring over resumes. Ronnie Lott, obviously pleased with his work. Maybe so too Joe Castiglione, the athletic director at Oklahoma. Rob Mullins, we'll hear from him a little bit later on, the chair of the selection committee and also the athletic director at Oregon. All of those guys, they talk about the teams that they are affiliated with. They recuse themselves from the discussion. These guys will participate in the discussion in its entirety. Reese Davis, Joey Calaway, David Pollock, Kirk Herbstreit joins us in just a second. So what do you want to see the most?
Well, we've been waiting all season long for LSU Alabama to play, and they finally played. And Alabama played within 5 points of the second best team in the country, according to the committee, with a banged-up Tua. By the end of the game, could barely walk. So now we just want to see how far do they fall. There's a group of one-loss teams in there with Georgia and Oklahoma and Utah and Oregon sitting there. So does Alabama fall within that group and still have a shot at getting back into the top 4 by the end?
Yes, sorry. When you look at the next thing from me is the committee tells us every year that every week is a week-to-week basis and it's an empty slate. If that's the case, Minnesota, where are they today? Because what they did last week, they beat the number 4 team according to the committee. And they kind of dominated the game. They did a great job start to finish. So if it's a week-to-week thing with the committee, how much does the Gophers go up and up and up? I could see at least 10 spots.
It is a week-to-week thing, and I agree with you, but it's also entire body work. They don't discount everything that's happened now.
There were 6 teams with 2 losses ahead of Minnesota.
They're going to go on. I told you in the open, they've got a rocket-powered outboard engine on that boat now, helping them row. Kirk Herbstreit joins us now. So, Kirk, what is it that you're most looking forward to seeing when we unveil the rankings in just a second?
Well, I think you guys are touching on the things that are the most intriguing. You know, where Minnesota goes at last week at 17, beat number 4. I just think the rankings themselves, you know, is anybody able to jostle and move a little bit ahead of where they were a week ago? Georgia was down at 6 last week. I think they could be in the top 4 this week. Joey, you bring up a good point about Alabama. What did the committee see in that game? You talked about Tua. He still threw for over 400 yards. He doesn't play defense. I think Joe Burrow is still going through that Alabama defense. So it was not a game that I think helped Alabama, even though the score was a little bit closer than maybe some people think. They may be sitting at 5 this week, Reese, but it'll be interesting to see where they go in future weeks. All they have really is the game at Jordan-Hare in a couple weeks against Auburn.
Well, what we're going to debate is even if Alabama is 4 tonight, and I don't think my colleagues agree with me, I don't think they can hold it. We'll find out. But everybody else can hand it to them and let them keep it. We'll see. PJ Fleck's going to join us in a little while. Rob Mullins will talk about the committee's decisions. And, of course, you see these things just as soon as we do, so let's get to it right now. Let's take a look at this week's college football playoff rankings brought to you by Chick-fil-A. Appalachian State into the rankings. They were unranked in the initial outlier, and Kansas State, after the loss to Texas, they fall to 24. What do you see there, Joe?
Yeah, and this is sort of that area where you start to look for that group of 5 team. Who's going to be the highest ranked group of 5 that would play in the Cotton Bowl this season? And it appears that Cincinnati right now would be higher ranked. We don't see them yet from 21 to 25.
That's a good call. Boise State keeps finding ways to win. They're in 21 to 25. Now as we go 20 through 16, there are the Bearcats that Joey mentioned, up 3 spots to 17, just behind Notre Dame. Memphis right on the heels, and Cincinnati, Memphis will figure all of that out in the American. Kirk, what do you see in this group?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Joey's talking about that group of 5. That could be settled right there. Both those teams, Cincinnati and Memphis, moving up 3 slots to 17 and 18, but sets up for potentially a huge championship game in the American.
And Iowa with a game against Minnesota, so another top 20 opponent for the Gophers when we see them eventually. Let's look at 11 through 15. Michigan at 15, 1 spot behind Wisconsin. And there's Baylor, undefeated. Now, Minnesota has taken a rocket ship up because we haven't seen them yet. Yep. Baylor can do the same thing by beating Oklahoma this week. Primetime game, College Game Day will be there.
I don't know if it's going to be a rocket ship up. They might be able to move a couple spots up, but I think what you see here is important is no Minnesota. To be continued.
If Baylor goes 10-0 and beats Oklahoma, they'll hop the 2 lost teams in front of them. So
they have
I
to.
think.
They have to.
And Auburn, the most important non-contender in all of college football.
They have ties everywhere.
Everywhere, because they play Georgia and Alabama, who are fighting for the 4th spot in the playoff. They've already beaten Oregon in the last second shot, so Oregon is pulling for them to look as good as they can down the stretch, Auburn and Georgia this weekend. Let's look at the top 10 now. And the Sooners, you know what? Some consistency here. Clemson was penalized because they stopped a 2-point conversion and survived North Carolina. Oklahoma slips a spot probably for the same reason. Happened to them against Iowa State on Saturday night. Sooners get Baylor this weekend. They are at number 10. Penn State tumbles out of the top 4. They go 5 spots down. Herbstreit's going, wow. Why? Did you not expect Penn State to go that far down, Kirk?
No, I did. I'm on the edge of my seat seeing where PJ Fleck and the boat's going to end up here. This is great.
Give me number 8.
Penn State, but
8.
How high will they go?
There they are. They're at 8.
Yeah, in a game where they dominated. It was a close score at the end, but if you watch the game, the way they played, they absolutely look like a top 10 team that looks like they deserve the respect that they didn't get last week.
You know who you haven't seen yet? Pac-12, right? Let's see number 7.
Yeah.
There's one of them. The Utes. The Utes are still in a fight for the Pac-12 South. They've got UCLA this weekend. That's how odd this division is. UCLA has a losing overall record, and they still control their fate, not destiny, according to Chip Kelly. So UCLA and Utah this weekend at number 7. So the Utes at number 7 in position potentially to make the playoff. So you look at this right now. David, what's the biggest surprise you've had? Are you upset? Because you wanted Minnesota at least a 6.
I think they should have been up there. Yeah. I mean, again, we're taking this week by week. That was an awesome performance. And here's the thing. When I look at Baylor and Minnesota, I can separate the two very easily. Listen, Minnesota's been doing this for a whole month. Minnesota is on the up. You can see them. Tanner Morgan has settled in. He's doing great. He's got an elite group of wide receivers. I think that team has definitely been rising consistently. Baylor's been kind of just flubbing around, triple overtime, Texas Tech, double overtime, TCU. So I think Minnesota.
3 points West Virginia.
3 points West. I mean, it's just been kind of
And I think if Tanner Morgan can duplicate what he did against Penn State, coming into that game, he's completing 65%. He he was up and down at times. In that game, 18 of 20, and made
hard to do that every week.
but he made every throw. Offensive game calling was terrific. Now, if they can continue that, they got to do it more than one time, I believe. And so if he can continue that, they'll keep moving up.
All right, before we go top 6, Kirk, what's the biggest thing that jumped out at you, 7 through 25? Anything you saw there so far?
That roar I just heard from the football facility in Minneapolis, the fact that they're up in that top 8 right now and feeling good. Everything is in front of them. Let's not get carried away here. That was a great win against Penn State. They're going to Kinnick Stadium Saturday. Like, they need to just keep their focus right now and just try to win every single week because it's all in front of them. They got Iowa. They got Wisconsin. They could have a Big Ten championship. So they're just fine with that ranking right now. They made a big jump from 17.
Hey, I'm going to tell you, Kirk, right now, this may sound crazy. They can afford a loss. One.
Now,
if they win, if they win a close loss, if they win the Big Ten. Let's show the top 6.
Yeah, that did sound crazy.
But I'm telling you, let's start at the top because that's where less of the suspense is. LSU, as expected, has moved into the top spot. If you think Ohio State would win the game, that's a reasonable thing to think. But LSU's resume, combined with the way it is played, most deserving to be at number 1.
There's no doubt. And listen, you can use your eye test to say they're really good, but you also use the body work and go, they're also really, really good.
Absolutely. Top 2 teams going to be LSU. I expect to see Ohio State at number 2, and we do. Buckeyes slip out of that top spot through no fault of their own. LSU went to Alabama and won, and they are rewarded for it. Ohio State still sitting there
let's
at
get
2.
to 3. Come on.
You know who 3 is. 3 is going to be Clemson.
And
the Tigers are 10-0. They're on their way to the ACC championship game. There is no reasonable way that Clemson could stumble before the playoff.
We thought that against North Carolina also, and they came close to stumbling. Now, Wake Forest, they have this week, who hasn't looked good. They lost last week, so, we don't expect it.
All right. Let's see who number 4 is for the moment.
This is when it gets weird.
Number 4 is Georgia. So Georgia hasn't always looked sharp. Great offense has been challenged at times, but the Bulldogs, they've got that. It wasn't the magnitude, but they've got the Ohio State-like loss from the last couple of years on the resume.
Wasn't pretty. Penn State lost a couple years ago as well. But I think when you look at Georgia, there's 2 really big wins with Florida and Notre Dame. Those are 2 big wins that they're going to get credit for.
And number 5 is Alabama, just behind on the outside. It's going to take a lot of stumbling on the outside for the Crimson Tide to move into that top 4. And if that doesn't happen, this will be the first playoff without Alabama. And Oregon still with only the 1 loss in the last second to Auburn. So Oregon in position, perhaps, to make it to the college football playoff. LSU has its highest ranking in the playoff era at number 1. Minnesota makes the largest jump into the top 10. They moved up 9 spots, showing that, as David mentioned, the committee is watching week to week and rewarding performance. Baylor has the lowest ranking, the 9-0 team from the Power 5 in the college football playoff era. And no team.
That's awesome.
Nobody held their spot. Kirk, you see it now. You see the top 4. Georgia at number 4. Are you in agreement with what the committee selected at this juncture?
Yeah, right. As we sit right now with the results from last week, I thought Georgia would be at 4 personally and Alabama at 5. I thought Minnesota might be up in the top 6. But what David said is accurate at this point. I know they had the loss against South Carolina at home. It was not pretty. But I think what happened last week opened the door for them to slide from 6 up into the top 4 because of impressive wins against Notre Dame and against Florida. So for now, no issue at all. The interesting thing is, as we move forward, is Alabama. If Georgia eventually loses, whether it's to Auburn or it's the SEC championship game, those are 2 big hurdles. What happens to Alabama? Do they move up? Or is there a little bit of a ceiling and teams behind them potentially going up and over them? By the way, Reese, I don't think that would happen until the last weekend when you start to see conference championships potentially out of the Pac-12 or the Big 12 is when they might go by Bama.
I agree. That's why I say I don't think Alabama can do anything to hold a spot or to move up. What they have to have hope for is to have everyone else hand it to them by messing up.
Let me ask you a question real quick, though, to that. Do you think if Minnesota wins the next 2 weeks, they'd be up behind Bama?
We're talking about at the end. I'm talking about at the
But I'm saying
very
before
end.
the end. That's before the end. That's before the Big Ten championship game. I think they could pass up Bama before that point.
Probably so.
With two
that's
wins.
what I'm saying.
That
I think
wouldn't
the
be the
teams
one
behind them have to give it to them.
But that wouldn't be the one that mattered at the end of the day. Oregon at 6 and Utah at 7 is the one that is going to threaten Alabama's ability to stay where they are, because you assume that Georgia, LSU have to play one another. Ohio State has a tough one coming up. Minnesota have to get past Ohio State eventually. But at 6 and 7, if I'm the Pac-12, and we talked all season long almost that the Pac-12 was out of this thing, now sitting at 6 and 7, they look like they're in a pretty good spot because of the teams ahead of them.
Now, look, it's quite a task for Minnesota to go undefeated. I understand that.
Definitely.
But I think the Pac-12 teams have to be wary of Minnesota because they've got Iowa ranked, Wisconsin ranked, still in the regular season schedule, and then likely a date with Ohio State, potentially Penn State again, but probably Ohio State. So Minnesota, Kirk, really has everything in front of them, and I think the Pac-12 has to also root for them to get out of the way because they have still more growth potential, even more than they've shown so far.
Yeah, there's a lot of rankings still ahead of them. I think if you're a Pac-12 fan, or especially an Oregon and a Utah fan, I think what Joey's saying, we've been kind of watching those two teams now for a few weeks and seeing the potential meeting that they would have in a Pac-12 championship. We kept saying if there's a one-loss Oregon and a one-loss Utah, be careful. While everyone's writing off the Pac-12 with the chaos in front of them, the Pac-12 champion could still be very, very much alive to get into the Final Four at the end of it. Minnesota, to me, yeah, they have Iowa, yeah, they have Wisconsin, but if they don't beat Ohio State, they're knocked out, and then that opens the door for a discussion potentially at the end with the Pac-12 champion, a Big 12 champion, and Alabama sitting there trying to get to that 4th spot. That's what I see this thing as. It's kind of trending. If Ohio State and LSU and Clemson all went out, there's 1, 2, and 3. Now we're sitting here talking about that 4th spot with the 3 teams I just mentioned.
Well, and Oregon and Utah really need each other to do well. Like, they have to both be one-loss teams when they get to that point. They need each other to do well so they can get that signature win. Because here's the deal. If you look at Oregon and Alabama, you want to talk about Alabama only beating A&M, that's a better win probably than Oregon has. That's a better win than probably Utah has. So, one other thing, too, to point out here is the Big 12's in trouble.
That's what I was going to ask.
The Big 12 is, if you want to point to a conference that has a good chance of being left out, once they start beating each other, you look at 10 and 13 playing each other, that doesn't give them a big boost up the rankings either, so they're going to be kind of hanging in the same spot.
Well, what we assume was their best team has been in a struggle. Oklahoma has lost, and then they stop a 2-point conversion last week to win. And so they should be in trouble. It's not like a situation where Minnesota's looked really good, and we're talking about them. The Big 12, on the other hand, has tried to be in trouble because their best team, which we assume is Oklahoma, hasn't looked great. Now, if Baylor can beat them, I don't know that they get the same credit that Minnesota just got. But as far as the Big 12 is concerned, I think it would help them if Baylor won that game.
Now, there would be an undefeated champion potentially if Baylor could win out. Kirk, what do you think?
Well, I think Baylor's the wild card. I think Oklahoma is not helping themselves with the way they're playing. We were so excited at the beginning, the first 5 games of the year, about, hey, this Oklahoma team is no longer just having to outscore people. They got a defense. And in the last couple of weeks, they've given up 41 and 48, and all of a sudden it's like, what the heck has happened to this, or 41 and 48. What the heck has happened to the OU defense? Now I don't think it's helping their cause as far as if they get caught up in a cluster. They of course have the Baylor game this week. They have they have one more game, the Big 12 championship. Oklahoma State is still out there. To me, I think the Big 12's best case could be Baylor. If Baylor were to upset OU this weekend, they have Texas left. They would have a Big 12 championship game left. And then it comes down to what you just said. How far of a jump do they get by beating Oklahoma at home? Do they get up in there with Utah and Oregon to give themselves possibly a chance going into the last weekend of the year?
There is another debate. We're not going to dive in here. This is going to be called foreshadowing a little bit that we're going to get in later.
There's no telling America.
The best debate, the most compelling one, is you have these one-loss champions, and you have Georgia lose a close game at Auburn this week, but then beat LSU in the SEC championship game. Then you have 2-loss Georgia, but SEC champion. You got to figure LSU already has a spot.
One a week. One a week.
One a week.
You have one a week where it's like if this and this and this, then it's interesting.
I wanted to give you a chance to think about your position on such a matter.
Got it. We wrote that. You ready?
You know what Joey's position is? Whatever the rankings are right now,
exactly.
They should stay right in that order until somebody loses and move up.
Exactly.
Clemson is underrated.
Yeah,
underrated. Come on.
All right. Much more coming up. PJ Fleck is going to join us in just a little bit. Coming up, the biggest win he's had at Minnesota by far, but much more ahead. The Gophers head coach is going to crowd surf right on into College Football Playoff Top 25. Rob Mullins, his job as the chair of the selection committee. We'll talk to him about the change at the top. First time a number one team has won and fallen out of the top spot in the College Football Playoff era. Rob will answer lots of questions coming up, and basketball on the way. Phil Knight Invitational from Portland, Oregon, number 15. Rob, the athletic director there, taking on James Weissman, who I guess is going to play 9 Eastern on ESPN and the ESPN app.
College Football Playoff Top 25 is presented by Chick-fil-A. Try their grilled nuggets for a bite-sized backyard taste of the grill on the go. And in part by AT&T. Is College Football Playoff Top 25 presented by Chick-fil-A.
Got a new number one in the College Football Playoff rankings. LSU, after beating Alabama, gets its highest ranking in the CFP era. Ohio State won, but the resume not quite what LSU's is. They slipped to 2, Clemson at 3, and Georgia moves in to that top 4 spot. Alabama and Oregon in the top 6. Joining us now is the chair of the College Football Playoff Selection Committee, Rob Mullins, who's also the athletic director at the University of Oregon. Just to get this out of the way, Rob recuses himself whenever Oregon is discussed in the committee room. Rob, seemed pretty easy for us that LSU was going to move into number one. Was it that decisive in the room?
Well, I mean, obviously we spent some time discussing it. You got 2 great teams at the top, LSU and Ohio State. And just like I said last week, the committee's really impressed with Ohio State and the consistent level of high play. But when you look at LSU's resume with the win over Alabama on the road, that makes their 4th top 20 win, and they're the only team in the nation with that. They're deserving of that number 1 ranking.
Okay, so we were all fascinated with how 4 through, I guess, probably about 9 or 10 would shake out. Georgia winds up in the 4th spot. How would you characterize the discussions for all of those teams in that grouping, understanding that you end up with them putting them in there 3 teams at a time? How would you characterize those discussions?
Well, obviously, I'm recused from the room when Oregon's on the board. But as you look at 4 and 5, the discussion around those 2 teams was, 2 really good teams. Obviously, 1-loss teams. We just saw Alabama had a tough loss against LSU. But you compare that against Georgia's resume, and they're 2 big wins that Georgia had. And then when the committee reported to me, when you get to Oregon and Utah, as we mentioned last week, Oregon has the win over USC. Utah lost to USC. And obviously, you can see the move of Minnesota and how the committee was impressed with the win over Penn State.
Okay, so that brings me to Minnesota, and then make this huge jump, unprecedented in the college football playoff era in terms of leaping into the top 10. How big a difference? I mean, obviously, they're playing great now. They weren't early in the season. How is that being evaluated in the committee room, their improvement?
Well, that's a piece of it. I mean, obviously, we're looking at the full resume. As we mentioned last week, non-conference schedule wasn't as strong as some. And then they had only played 1 team in their league with a winning record until Penn State. But when you watched the game last week, they beat a Penn State team that was then ranked number 4 and had pressed in committee until that point. We were really impressed with what Minnesota did.
How close, and for people who don't know, you put teams up on the board, the top 3 vote getters move in, and then you have the next round with 3 more teams added. I'm not explaining it precisely because you need a lot of time to do so. Well, let me ask you this. How close was Minnesota to being even higher?
They were in that pool of, as you mentioned, we work with teams, pools of 6. So they're in, typically a team is in that range of 4 to 9. So they were in that discussion in that pool from in those ranges. Okay, and the other issue, the committee early on had Clemson at number 5. It seemed largely due to stopping a 2-point conversion against a team with a mediocre record.
Same thing happens to Oklahoma on Saturday night, and the Sooners slip a spot. Was that the biggest impact on Oklahoma's ranking, the fact that they had to survive against a team that maybe is better than its record, but the record is mediocre?
Well, again, we're not just looking at one game, but we are aware of the game. And when we look at Oklahoma's schedule, obviously, we know that their one loss is to K-State. They beat a good Texas team. But, of course, we know exactly what happens last week, and we're watching those games.
All right, Rob, I've got one more quick one then. How does that reflect on the way the committee feels about the Big 12? Because Baylor has won its games, but it is yet to really make a climb.
Yeah, I mean, similar to last week, when you look at Baylor's non-conference schedule, their 3 non-conference opponents have won a total of 6 games. Obviously, Baylor has some great wins. They're certainly figuring out how to win in close games. But at this point, the committee felt they belonged at number 13.
All right, Rob, thanks a lot for being with us. He'll be with us every week when the selection committee unveils its rankings. Rob Mullins, the chair of the selection committee.
He meant good ones. He didn't mean great ones. No. he misspoke.
You're talking about Baylor there. Okay, Kirk's wanted to get in. Kirk, what's your reaction to what Rob said?
A couple things. They can say whatever they want. Right now, they just don't believe in Baylor. They need to see more from Baylor. Say however you want to talk about it, analytics, eye test, whatever. They need to see Baylor against Oklahoma until they buy in, similar to they needed to see Minnesota play against Penn State. Guys, let's back up on Minnesota because we're all excited about them. We're loving what P.J. Fleck's doing. But if you go back to the non-conference, he mentioned they didn't play anybody in the non-conference. Not only is it a weak non-conference slate, they almost lost to South Dakota State, to Fresno, Georgia Southern gave them a game. So, and then the 5 Big Ten games that they won prior to Penn State, they were the bottom of the barrel, a winning percentage combined of 42%. So while we're really excited, I think the great thing about Minnesota is they made a significant jump. They got Iowa, they got Wisconsin. If they keep winning, they go to Indy. So they should be very, very happy with the way their season started, with the fact that they are where they are.
Yeah, that was the point I was making to Rob when I asked him about the improvement versus where they were in the early season. So you guys want to put up a blind resume here?
Sure.
See, Joey loves these. Joey loves blind resumes.
Let's go.
Okay, we're going to see a blind resume here. We got teams 1, 2, and 3. You see where they rank in the FPI. The strength of record, there's no tangible difference, nor is there really a great difference in strength of schedule, and none of them have beaten ranked opponents. A couple of them have losses. Who are you taking? Or is that one of those where you just throw a dart? It looks like a dart throw to me.
I mean, they're all the same, for goodness sakes. I mean, there's not much difference. Throw a dart.
FPI is a forward-looking measure, how well teams are expected to perform. So Team 1 is the team that is expected by FPI to perform its best. I'm guessing that's Alabama.
That would be
probably with FPI number 3. So, you make a choice, Joey?
All I know is, as we said, the third one has to be the worst-ranked team of the group. That's all I can tell you, Reese.
Yeah. So Utah at 7. That's how you would distinguish between Alabama, Oregon, and Utah, all ranked at 5, 6, and 7.
Did we learn anything there? Joey, did you learn anything there?
Just that I don't know how to read the strength of record, strength of schedule, FPI, all that stuff. I have no idea.
Well, okay. Strength of record is how well the average top 25 team could be expected to perform against the schedule.
Gotcha.
What chances you have. LSU's number 1 in that metric right there.
Yeah, I'm going to stick to just going back and watching the film and take it from there. That's it.
That's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
That's all I got.
Everybody does, football judgment is part of this.
That's what makes it awesome, because there's all those people in the room that sometimes the schedule matters a lot. Sometimes the eye test matters. That's what makes it
Which is why it's going to get interesting, though, at the end.
Yeah.
Because you're going to have to assume that if it's the Pac-12 champion comes out still with 1 loss, you're going to have to assume that team is better than Alabama from what you've seen after. If Alabama beats Auburn, there's still a question mark do you believe that team is better than Alabama?
Football judgment will factor into it. This is art, not science. How much football judgment goes into it as opposed to all of the metrics and so forth remains to be seen. There is P.J. Fleck.
He's having an elite day. Elite day.
Hey, not just day. An elite season so far. PJ's going to join us, talk about where his team is ranked, what's coming up next for them, what the ceiling is. Chick-fil-A impact players for the college football playoff. Look at these couple of receivers for the Gophers who just did in Penn State last week. Rashad Bateman, 7 grabs, 203 yards, and a touch. Tyler Johnson also had 7 catches, 104 yards, and a touchdown. Took care of Penn State.
What's Tanner Morgan got to do to get on there? He's only 18 at 20.
Tanner Morgan has been terrific, been among the leaders in QBR all season, the Minnesota quarterback, and joining us now is the head coach of the Gophers, Minnesota, with the rivalry game, Floyd of Rosedale against Iowa coming up this weekend. PJ, what did you think when you saw your team ranked number 8? What's your reaction to that?
Well, we're just thankful and humbled to be in the position that we are to represent the University of Minnesota, the state of Minnesota on a national level. We've got a lot of work left to do. We got a big rivalry game here this week against Iowa. We've taken one game at a time, one game championship seasons, we call it. And we haven't won at Kinnick Stadium for the last 20 years. So we got our work cut out for us. But again, it's a privilege and an honor to represent the University of Minnesota and the state of Minnesota on a national level.
That was such an exhilarating day. Someone wrote a story in which one of the security guards at your stadium said, "This is the biggest party I've ever been to." And even with that mantra of one game at a time, 1-0 every week, what did you have to do to try to make sure that your team got right back on the proper emotional pitch for this week?
Well, I think that what you have to be able to do is you can't make one game bigger than the other game. And that starts all the way from South Dakota State, all the way through Penn State, and the consistency level of how you talk to your football team, not only Saturday night. I mean, it is a party every Saturday night inside our locker room after we win or on the road. We take that minute. There are no bad wins. We take that moment, we capture it, we celebrate. And then Sunday, we celebrate again inside our team room. And literally, I mean, we go through a series of things. We high-five each other. We tell each other how good we are. We talk about what people are saying about us. And then we end it and literally put our leather vests on, zip it up, and get ready to be critiqued and be coached as we continue to move forward and go back to 0-0.
Hey, PJ, I know typically you wait to the end of the year to kind of look back at what you're most proud of as a coaching staff and on a team, but the personality of this team really on display against Penn State. When you look at this team from where you've come in 3 years, what are some of the pillars of this 2019 team that really are starting to show that to be a real strength of the team?
Well, they're a connected football team. They absolutely love each other. And we said that from the day we got here. You don't have to like each other, but you must love each other. And love is sacrifice. And we talk about this word family. Forget about me, I love you. They really like playing on the same team. They really like being around each other. And they're a connected team on and off the field. We talk about being successful in all 4 areas of their life, academically, athletically, socially, and spiritually. Now, this team has 85 players above a 3.0 GPA. And that is going to transfer over to the football field because you can't be elite in one area of your life and not elite in the other area of your life. You're either elite or you're not. And these guys have continued to do the right things off the field, continue to connect. They really love each other. They've really bonded. And a lot of the credit goes to those 11 to 12 seniors who really stuck through 3 head coaching changes, a lot of cultural changes, and here they are as 11 to 12 that have stuck around who play significant football for us and have led us to this spot.
Coach, coming into the game against Penn State, we assumed that you guys had to run the football well to beat a team like Penn State. And then Tanner Morgan, which David mentioned, and Reese didn't show the film, but Tanner Morgan comes in, goes 18 of 20. When did you know that Tanner Morgan was the kind of quarterback and have this kind of game that can carry you guys, not just against at Penn State, but against anyone you play moving forward?
Well, I've known this young man for 5 years. He was committed back at Western Michigan for 2 years, and then we brought him here to Minnesota with us. And you know, I think we're the only head coach quarterback combination that looks like each other, which, you know, I think he doesn't have enough hair to be able to sit there. Maybe that's a good thing for him, maybe not a good thing for him, and maybe that's a bad thing for me. But he has in high intangibles. He took his high school from 3 wins all the way to 12 wins. He's just one of those guys that's an overachiever. He always accomplishes more. He makes everybody else around him better. He's an incredible leader, and he's so tough, mentally, physically, emotionally. And this does not shock any of us of how well he's played. Whether it was Zach Annexstad or him, we felt they both had that toughness to lead us to where we are right now.
Well, PJ, wish you the best of luck. Congratulations on the huge jump, and I wish you the best of luck. You want to finish it up for us?
I appreciate it. Row the boat, Scotty Mon. Go Gophers.
There you go. And I like the way you stared the camera down, right down the barrel. That's the way I want it from now on. No walking off the podium while you're doing this, all right? Be elite, PJ.
You got it.
I love it.
All right, brother. All right, good luck,
You guys too.
All right, big game coming up for the Gophers this week against Minnesota. SEC chaos. Are we really that far from it? You think everything got settled in Tuscaloosa on Saturday? What if Georgia can't get out of Auburn, but then does beat undefeated LSU?
Watching college football playoff, top 25. presented by Chick-fil-A.
In 2011, the two best teams in college football are from the same conference and the same division. And this infuriates everybody.
Jelly nails it.
You had all these different corners of the country with no representation in the national title game at all. You go back to the Alabama-LSU national championship game, right? Which, by the way, sucked. 21-0, LSU barely crosses the 50-yard line.
Plays, hammering away at the clock right now. And Richardson breaks free on the sideline, end zone. How about that? Finally, a touchdown.
And that was the culmination product in 2011 that college football gave to the world, said, this is the best we can give you. This is our championship game.
Alabama, they win the BCS championship behind.
That, I think, helped spur a playoff more than anything else.
And that game Stephen Godfrey was talking about was in New Orleans. You know, the last 3 times the national championship game's been played in New Orleans, LSU's been in it. Coming up right after the show, you can see the full episode, CFB 150, the evolution of how a champion is declared. If you've missed any of this great American Game series, you can catch up on demand via the ESPN app. I've been teasing this all night. Here's the hypothetical scenario. Alabama wins out. LSU goes undefeated but loses to Georgia in the championship game. Now, we're only saying Georgia loses to Auburn. They also play Texas A&M. So Georgia loses one of those games, yet still beats LSU in the SEC championship game. So the Dogs 11-2, Alabama and LSU with 1 loss. How does it shake out? Who
do we
gets
have
in the
any
playoff?
other context of, is it Oregon with a 1 loss? I mean, I think it's.
How would you rank? Would you rank the Pac-12 champion ahead of any of those teams?
And see, that to me would be interesting because if they lost to Auburn or Auburn beat Oregon as well, and you'd be SEC champs. Honest to goodness, I think I would give the nod to Georgia in that aspect because of the big wins. I mean, I would have to lean. If you beat LSU, to me, the number 1 team in the country, which, by the way, I think is a very long shot for Georgia to go outscore LSU. Golly, I think under that circumstance, I think both of those teams would get in. I'm not saying it's right, but I think both of those teams would get in.
I think I'm leaning with Davey. And I don't say that very often. I think both those teams will get in. But I do believe in the Pac-12 championship game, one of those teams has to make a statement win. Not just win a close game, but blow the other team out, 2 one-loss teams to even get into this conversation.
Okay, so you'd say a 2-loss team with a questionable loss, but with the good wins that Georgia has, would get in. Kirk, what do you think?
You're saying if Georgia beat LSU in the SEC championship?
Yes, but lost a game before then to either Auburn or A&M.
It'd be hard to imagine them winning the SEC championship and not being in. And it'd also be tough to imagine LSU with their resume, with these 4 wins that they already have, losing in Atlanta and still not being in. Their resume is already more impressive and will be at the end of the year than anybody else out there. So if they win out the rest of their games, finish off with a win against A&M, I don't want to ever say it doesn't matter what they do in Atlanta, but based on what they've done up to this point, it really wouldn't matter. They will be going in to the Final Four regardless of what happens in those 60 minutes in that SEC championship.
I don't think there's any question about LSU.
By the way,
I think the question would be Georgia or Alabama.
But by the way, how do you get super motivated for the SEC championship game if you're LSU in that scenario? When if I lose, I'm pretty sure I'm still going to get in. I
but
lose this
they
game.
haven't won one in a while.
I get what you're saying.
They haven't won an SEC
they'll be fired.
Human nature and kids and hearing that, like when you have that sense of urgency when Georgia's there and they know they have to win and they're going home, that urgency is already placed there. That would be mind-blowing to think about going into the SEC championship game and LSU's like, it'd be cool if we won, but we could still win a match.
Okay, for what it's worth, the All-State playoff predictor, if you had that exact scenario, which is the loss to Auburn, not necessarily to A&M, 85% chance LSU would make it. They're going. We know that.
Yeah.
72% chance Alabama would make it at 11-1, and only 17% that Georgia would.
You got Minnesota on that list?
According to the playoff predictor.
Minnesota went out. Let's see what happens.
Basically, this is among those teams. All right, Paul Feinbaum joins us now. Paul with SEC Nation every week and keeps a close eye on this. So, Paul, I'll let you jump in on the hypothetical. If that were to happen, LSU wins out in the regular season, loses to Georgia in the SEC championship game. Georgia, which has lost to Auburn or Texas A&M, 2-loss Georgia. How do you stack them up along with Alabama?
Reese, at my age, I don't have too many great fantasies left in me, but man, I am excited by that prospect. The idea of doing a talk show like I do and have that debate raging on, I might lean slightly toward Alabama because I still can't get past Georgia losing to South Carolina at home while Alabama went to Williams-Brice and won by 24. I know that we're going deep into the weeds in terms of difference makers, but to me that's a big deal. I also think LSU, beating LSU would be significant. So in the end, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to side probably with the SEC champion because Georgia found a way to get there. They had to win the division. Alabama didn't do that.
Okay, when you look at where the rankings sit right now, what's your reaction to Georgia being fourth? Is that appropriate? Would you have put someone else there, Alabama or a Pac-12 team or anyone else?
Yeah, I would probably have Alabama 4 because I look at it and I see Alabama, to me, whether you want to use the word unequivocal or not, I probably would. I think they're one of the 4 best teams in the country. And I am going to, as a committee member, if you put me in that position, think about the Tua injury. So that's a big deal. I mean, I have some issues. I may have some issues down the road, though, Reese, not to get ahead of ourselves, with Mullins as the committee chairman. If it comes down to one of the teams we've mentioned in Oregon, we are heading toward an area I don't think we've ever been with this committee. I mean, the credibility is going to lie somewhere in the balance. I hope they can figure out a way to deal with that because he has to be able to give you and all of us a better answer than I was told something. He's the chairman of the committee.
But Paul, to be fair to him, he has to step out of the room. And as long as you're going to have sitting athletic directors on this committee, there is the potential for this type of thing. That's all they can do. I mean, he can't be in the room to discuss them, and I think these are all honorable guys. I think that's important to point out.
Don't misunderstand me. I know him and I like him. I'm just saying that it puts that committee in the crosshairs, though, because I think I'm a big believer in transparency, and I'm not sure we're going to get it if he's sitting outside having a soft drink.
Yeah, I think it's it's a difficult spot, and it brings into question something I brought up before, and I think all these guys are honorable and they have great integrity, but I think it puts the committee in a tough spot to have sitting athletic directors from anywhere on the committee, but that's where we are right now.
And do we ever get true transparency anyways? So it really, I mean, come on, we don't ever get backstory details of who was arguing about what and who thought what. It's just, this is 4, this is 5. Oh, they're good.
And the chair of the committee is in the position, now we got to get to Bray, but the chair of the committee is in a position to represent what the entire group decided, not necessarily what he would advocate for. And that's what the role of the chair has been throughout the college football playoff era. Coming up, college football playoff top 25, Oklahoma and Baylor. Playoff impact, how big, if any, do we have?
I met Dan and Caleb.
College Football Playoff Top 25 is presented by Chick-fil-A's new mac and cheese. Your dinner plans just got cheesier.
Stand up! Stand up!
Come on, college football.
It's hot!
Oh yeah, what a good call. Come on.
Stand up! Here we go! Stand up! Here we go!
Oh yeah.
Biggest marquee game every week on College Game Day.
College Game Day headed back to Waco Saturday, 9 a.m. Eastern Time as a highlight game of the week. Some coaches already looking ahead.
You know, we have kind of a legacy around here that we've only had one team in the last 12 years that's lost more than one game in the regular season. And, you know, I'd like for this team to be able to continue that.
It'll be a challenge this week to, you know, get our guys prepared, healed up, and ready to go against a really tough football team in a tough environment to play in on the road at Auburn. But that's what the SEC is about.
It's an important game for both teams. And, you know, throw out the records. There's a cliche you could use, you know, when you play this type of game.
They put this game on their calendar. This is the game that they want to win. This is a rivalry game for them. They want to beat LSU. This is the team they would like to beat along with Mississippi State. And we know we're going to get their best shot.
I feel like I know more about Wake Forest than any team we've played all year because I've been looking at them for a month.
You only get game day when you've earned it. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, I'm not worried about our guys not being focused for the football this week. I'm not worried about that. I know our guys will be focused.
Focus they will be, probably focused on Jalen Hurts, our PlayStation player impact rating. You see where Jalen is among Big 12 quarterbacks, and Baylor with running back John Lovett with a rating of 90. So, Kirk, you'll be there, and Baylor with us for game day, calling the game. What about the playoff impact of Oklahoma and Baylor? What do you see?
Yeah, I can't wait to watch Jalen Hurts in this setting. Baylor's playing really good defense. Incredible how they've improved from year one under Matt Rule to this year. We're only allowing 19 points a game. And, meanwhile, you got Jalen Hurts, who's leading the nation in passing efficiency. And the big question is, at the end of that Iowa State game, things got a little bit sideways. Decision-making and things of that nature. They'll have a great week of practice. But, David, I can't wait to see Hurts in that Baylor Bear defense.
And he's answered every challenge. And listen, the front three for Baylor is awesome. If you're not watching, they are Lynch, Lockhart, and Roy are three of the best defensive lineman combos in the country. Can they make it hard on Jalen Hurts? Can they stop the running game? Can they make him throw the football? I know he's leading the nation in passing efficiency. I still would live with him throwing rather than him running. So can Baylor muck it up and make it ugly? Because they have a good ability to do that against everybody they played. They're going to have to do it against.
They're going to have to bring more than three because three guys won't get to Jalen Hurts. They might get there, but they
might get him on the ground.
Exactly. They have to bring more than three. But they're a fun team to watch. Offensively, not a great game last week against TCU. They got to score more points.
We'll see how the Bears are able to do against the Sooners. For all of our guests, for PJ Fleck and Rob Mullins and Kirk and Joey and David, I'm Reese. I'll see you next week.